Hi, Dr. Yass here. I'd like to talk today about the diagnosis of scoliosis as a potential cause of back pain. There are multitudes of people who have back pain and are diagnosed with scoliosis, typically through an x-ray, and that becomes the supposed cause of their pain. And ultimately, there's very few choices that can be given if that is your diagnosis. Just to reinforce the point, scoliosis is curvature of the spine from side to side versus, say, a kyphosis, excessive rounding from front to back. But even in the case of kyphosis, there are very few options that the medical establishment can give you other than putting a rod in your spine to supposedly create the more appropriate alignment of the vertebrae. So it'll be one of these cases, which is the typical situation, which is where you're told that you have to determine when surgery is appropriate because of the level of pain that you can deal with. I want everyone to listen to this extremely carefully. Scoliosis can never cause pain. Scoliosis can never cause pain. Wrap your ears around that idea. Let me explain the justification for such a drastic statement. Scoliosis implies that instead of the vertebrae being in proper alignment, one under the other, we have misalignment. The vertebrae are not perfectly aligned one under the other. They're in a more arced type of situation. And somehow you're supposed to accept the idea that this misalignment of the vertebrae can create pain. That's the nature. Scoliosis causes pain. Let's go to the Yass method theoretical basis of why people have pain. Pain is an indication of a tissue in distress. That's why the body elicits the warning sign of pain to try to create conscious awareness of distress of a particular tissue. The tissue is not functioning properly, and therefore it wants you to become aware of the distress of the tissue, and that's why it elicits the emergency response signal of pain, so that you could perform or have a intervention performed to resolve the distress of the tissue. When the distress of the tissue has been resolved, there's no longer a need for the emergency signal to be elicited, and pain simply ceases. That's the nature of how the body works. Anybody should be willing to accept that premise. So if we're talking about scoliosis, I assume the tissue that we're discussing are vertebrae, bones. The tissue that is supposedly in distress with scoliosis, that is eliciting a distress signal of pain to show that there's something wrong, is vertebrae, bone. They're misaligned. That's it. They're just misaligned. What would be the typical cause of distress of a bone that would lead to the need for a pain signal to be elicited? That would be fracturing. Whether it's an arm bone, a knee joint, any type of bone typically is only going to elicit pain if it fractures. It has nothing to do with whether it's aligned properly or not. The only time distress of bone should occur is if there's some sort of fracturing. And I am not aware of any case of scoliosis where, along with the misalignment of the vertebrae, there is an indication that the bone has also fractured. And that without fracturing, where's the distress of the vertebrae? Is there some emotional disturbance within the vertebrae itself that he's not in line with his friends and therefore he's so upset that he feels he needs to elicit pain? I mean, what's the point Where is the justification or the rationale from a logical perspective that a misaligned vertebrae is going to elicit pain? There is none. There is none. Unless there's fracturing, vertebrae aren't going to elicit pain. Therefore, the diagnosis of scoliosis is meaningless, baseless. It's a meaningless statement. If you want to take it from the Yass perspective, what scoliosis is a symptom. The misalignment of the vertebrae is actually a symptom, just as pain is a symptom of some sort of muscle imbalance on one side of the vertebrae versus the other, where the stronger side is pulling the vertebrae towards it. So when you see a misalignment of vertebrae, it's because the muscles that are attached to the vertebrae, on one side it's stronger than the other. So the stronger side has a tendency to shorten, thereby pulling the vertebrae out of alignment. So you need to start thinking about the fact that scoliosis isn't a cause, it's actually a symptom. And the actual mechanism, when we talk about what's in distress, it's the muscle that's in distress. And what you're experiencing in terms of your pain is an excessive pull of the muscle on the vertebrae. It actually doesn't attach into the vertebrae itself. Vertebrae have connective tissue surrounding it called periosteum, and the muscle's attached to there. And since connective tissue has the highest density of pain receptors, it's going to ignite a pain signal due to the excessive tension of the strained muscle. So what you're experiencing is a muscle in distress due to an imbalance, which is allowing a muscle to become excessively lengthened on one side and a muscle excessively shortened on the other side. So it's a muscular cause. The actual alteration of the position of the vertebrae is actually a symptom, along with the pain, of this muscular imbalance. You really want to wrap your head around what I'm trying to tell you, because you've got two alternatives here. Having a rod put in your spine for no reason, which will lead to massive, obvious post-surgical symptoms, and worst of all, will not alter the cause of your symptoms, so you'll end up with the very same symptoms plus post-surgical symptoms. Or you can have an understanding through a logical perspective of what is actually happening there and understand what tissue is in distress, which is leading to the eliciting of pain, which is a muscular imbalance, and simply by resolving the imbalance, you resolve your symptoms, the actual cause of your symptoms, and therefore end the need for the pain signal, that emergency protective mechanism, to be elicited, and it ceases, and you have no more symptom, and you go on with your life. It is these types of diagnoses which have to make you concerned about accepting the existing medical system for diagnosing and treating pain as being valid at all. It's clearly not valid. When you could provide a diagnosis that will lead to something as extreme as having a rod put in your spine for no reason whatsoever, you really want to think about, are there alternatives to this existing system? The fact that the MRI is the primary mechanism to diagnose, and we all understand that the MRI is always taken when you're in pain, therefore whatever structural variation is there can be associated with the pain and used as the mechanism to say that's causing your pain. But you have to say, well, is it possible that that structural variation was there before I had pain? What do you think an MRI would say if it was taken before I had pain? The answer is, whether it was a day, a month, or even 6 months before you had pain, if an MRI was taken, it would have found exactly the same thing you had when you had pain. The MRI result would be identical. That is because these are structural variations that are slow and progressive in their degeneration, and they take years, if not decades, to develop. But just imagine if you were to have known that the structural variation was there before you had pain, and then you had pain, you'd suddenly come to the realization, well, if it was there before I had pain, why would I think it's the cause of my pain when I have pain? It's clearly not. Combine that with the fact that as many people without pain can be found to have the same exact structural variations in the same percentages as those with pain. Well, if I'm being told that structural variations like herniated disc, stenosis, arthritis, meniscal tears, all these structural variations that are identified, if I'm being told that they're the cause of my pain, then that should imply that people without pain don't have structural variations. And yet every study has proven. I mean, the sickest one is that over the age of 60, 90% of people without back pain have bulging or degenerative discs. 90%. So where's the correlation between structural variations and pain? It's insane. It's insane. I recognize that it is the system that is in place. I recognize that every major medical practitioner follows the process, accepts the MRI as valid, but you have to live by logic. If you don't want to be caught up in this system, which now encompasses over 130 million people in the United States suffering from chronic pain, roughly 1 billion in the world, 22 million Americans have become addicted to prescription pain medication. Everybody, forget science, everybody knows somebody who has had a failed surgery. That's not an accident. That's not the surgery was done wrong. That's not that the person was a bad candidate. It's that the wrong tissue is being treated. If the wrong tissue is treated, the distress of the responsible tissue continues, and therefore the pain signal, which is the emergency mechanism to allow you to know that that distress is still taking place, continues, and that's why you have pain. Chronic pain in almost all cases is misdiagnosed acute pain. You got to see it this way. There's no alternative. If you ever want to have a chance to resolve your symptoms, you need to move away from what is clearly a baseless, flawed system and move to the Yass method. The Yass method is the only method that actually uses your body's presentation of symptoms to identify what tissue is in distress and eliciting those symptoms so that you're aware of that particular tissue's distress. Bone, muscle, and nerve, the primary tissues that would be associated with having pain, all of them can be identified. Muscle is the primary tissue associated with pain. 95 to 98% of cases, it is the cause. And yet, muscular causes will never show up on MRIs. A muscle in spasm, a muscle that strains, a muscle that strains and refers symptoms. I know everyone has been told it's only nerves that can refer symptoms. That's a fallacy. A muscle can actually refer symptoms through trigger points. So you can have a strained rotator cuff and it refers symptoms into the hand. A muscle can strain and impinge on a nerve. That's what sciatica is. It's not a neurological symptom. It is not a neuropathy. It's actually a muscle impinging on a nerve, a muscular cause creating a neurological symptom. All of these are causes that will never show up, and there is no medical specialty educated or trained to identify these. You have a 90 to 95% chance of being misdiagnosed simply by entering the medical system. You need to step away from it and move to the only system that interprets the body's presentation of symptoms to properly identify the tissue eliciting those symptoms. That is the Yass method. If you want to get more information about the Yass method, go to my website, www.mitchellyass.com. Go on my Facebook page, Dr. Mitchell Yass. You can go on my YouTube page, Dr. Mitchell Yass. Unlimited free content available so you can understand why this system is so effective. You can contact me directly at drmitch@mitchellyass.com. That's drmitch at mitchellyass.com. Call me on my cell phone, 516-449-1359, 516-449-1359. The reality is you're going to have to take control of your body. You're going to have to take control of your future. It is time for you to have your pain resolved, for you to regain your function, and for you to reclaim your life. You need to get the Yass method. For now, this is Dr. Mitchell Yass wishing you a pain-free, fully functional life. Bye-bye.